Hello, my name is Shelby Schreier, and today I will be talking to you about differentiating instruction. So, what is differentiating instruction? It's when teachers adjust their curriculum and instruction to maximize the learning of all students. And all students is very important because there are many different types of students in the classroom. So a very diverse group of students, no matter what classroom you're in. You could have English language learners. You could have regular ed students. You could have students with disability. You could have gifted students. So teachers will take the curriculum and adjust it and teach it to students in a way that best fits each of them or the group of them. So by doing this, you will have to implement a variety of strategies, including flexibility, classroom management, and frequent assessment. These are all very important in differentiating instruction. So compared to a traditional classroom where the teacher will lecture to the whole class, give out homework, which is usually assigned in the book or just a worksheet, then the students are quizzed every so often, every, I don't know, couple weeks, and then they may have a test every 6 to 9 weeks, and then their grade is determined by their test scores and quiz scores and homework. That is not what differentiated instruction is at all. So students are assessed very often, and it's not just a test. It is through a variety of ways of assessing. And then based on their scores, that will determine what their needs are, and that will determine how we need to instruct and teach those particular students. And then through whole group or small group or independent work, whichever is best with those students for them to be able to learn. And then, of course, to be able to do all of this, you have to have good classroom management because the students, I kind of picture it as, so a traditional classroom, the students, it may be like, okay, you have a pasture of horses and they have to stay in this pasture and that's it. They all have to do the same thing. Well, with differentiated, they are able to roam free and do whatever they need, whatever's best for them. And so if you have horses running all over the place, this is a far-fetched idea, but it makes sense. If you have horses running all over the place and allowing them to do what they want and what best fits them, you need a set of rules and instructions in place to just keep everybody and all the horses tame and doing what they're supposed to. So, how do teachers differentiate instruction? The most important thing, first of all, before you start differentiating instruction is to know your students. Know what type of learner they are. Know what best fits them. Know what their interests are and know their readiness level. If you know those things, you can better group your students and it'll make it a lot easier and more personable. So to meet the needs of all learners, teachers must address three things. That is the content, the process, and the product. So the content is the knowledge and skills students use to master the content. Okay, so you are going to teach the same exact curriculum to students. You're going to teach the same concepts, but since all students learn different ways, you have to teach it in a different way to each group of students. With the process, it's the activity students use to master the content. So again, all students learn the same content and they learn the same set of whatever you're teaching for that lesson. They're going to learn best through different activities. So you might have one group of students who learns best through worksheets, or you might have another group of students who learns best through interactive games and activities. So, and then the product is a method students use to demonstrate their learning. So this kind of falls under the assessment. How best can they tell you what they've learned? Is it through a video, a PowerPoint, standing up in front of the class and talking about it, the concept that they've learned, writing it down and discussing it? What's best for that student? And allow them to express their learning through whatever's best for them. Now, if you have a student that constantly always wants to be doing a PowerPoint to prove to you that what they've learned or to show you, that is not okay, because then they're going to get used to it and that's their way of doing it, and it's not really pushing them to succeed and learn new things. So you need to instruct them and let them know, hey, you need to be doing other different concepts and demonstrations of how you've learned the content too. And then all of this is according to the student's readiness, their interests, and their learning profile. So as you can see, the picture says one size doesn't fit all. So you cannot just give all students one thing, one test, and expect them all to be able to do good, or you can't give all students one assignment and expect them to learn it all. So that's how teachers differentiate instruction. So how do teachers prepare for differentiated instruction? Well, the first thing you need to do before you really kind of start diving into it is to communicate with the students and parents. So I think it's really good if when you are talking to the parents to discuss the similarities and differences of a traditional classroom versus a differentiated classroom, because most of their parents, chances are most of the parents grew up in a traditional classroom, so they can easily relate and recognize the differences between how they've learned and how their student will now learn. And then you also need to discuss with them how assessments will be given, how those results of the assessments will be reflected and used to adjust the curriculum, and then how the students will be graded, because they will not be graded on how good they did on this one test or things like that. So you need to discuss with students and parents these things. And also it's important at the beginning of the year to talk to your students about it and get them excited about this new type of learning so that they're more willing to go along with it and be excited and work with you with it. And then it's important to encourage the parents to share insightful information regarding their child's strengths and weaknesses. And again, this is just to better know the child so that you can better know their learning needs. And then organize a classroom to allow for flexibility. So you need to organize a classroom, make sure you have an area for group work, so maybe some tables for bigger groups. You might want a set of desks for children who want to learn independently, and then maybe just some space in the room for children to collaborate and do just kind of talk it out with each other. So make sure you have this flexibility in your classroom. So in a traditional classroom, you may have the teacher's desk at the front and the students' desks all lined up facing the teacher, and that's not how a differentiated classroom should be set up. The teacher's desk should be towards the back or out, just basically out of the way to allow for the students to dive in and learn in their best interest. And then effective behavior management, what we had talked about earlier. Children have more independence now with this type of learning, so behavior management must be implemented. And what does differentiated instruction look like in the classroom? So there's not one correct way. There are many different ways to differentiate instruction in the classroom. You could have just a little bit of differentiation, or your whole classroom could be differentiated. It just depends on your readiness yourself and what you're comfortable with. So it's good to start out where you're most comfortable. So maybe English and reading would be where you're most comfortable. Start out very slow. It takes about 4 to 5 years for the classroom to be fully differentiated. So don't dog on yourself. If you get don't be overwhelmed. Do not overwhelm yourself either. Just start out really slow and collaborate with your colleagues so that you all can be on the same page, and so you guys can share ideas of how you would want to differentiate your classroom. So this next slide is common classroom practices that are used in today's classroom and why they don't work in a differentiated classroom. So you're going to we're going to discuss why they don't work, so what's wrong, and how we can change it to make it work into a differentiated classroom. So the first one is delivers instruction primarily by lecturing. So this would probably be done with whole group, like a traditional classroom. Well, not all students learn through audio and through lecturing. So you would want to implement some visual tools there, or you may even want to break the students up into groups or pairs so that they can deliver your instruction that way. So the next one is group students at the beginning of the year based on the previous year's achievement test scores. So you're not going to want to do your groups based on those test scores. You just want to look at those test scores and use them to get to know your students. What are their strengths on their tests and what are their weaknesses? So maybe at the beginning of the year, don't group your students right off the bat. Get a couple weeks to get to know your students and to assess them, and then based on what you have learned about them and based on what you've assessed through them, then you may group them. That would be a better option than to just automatically group them just based on test scores from 3 months ago. And then the third one is gives bonus points for classroom participation. So this one, you don't want to give bonus points for participation. You want to, because if a student participates a lot, their grade's going to be an A. Well, how good did they learn the content? Well, that's not shown in their grades. So that's why that one doesn't work in a differentiated classroom. So instead, don't do bonus points at all, or do bonus points based on what the child has learned about the content. So maybe bonus points on questions over the content. So that is all I have for my presentation. Thank you for listening.